On a Wednesday morning in late September, in a fifth grade classroom at Riverside Preparatory Academy in Charlotte, North Carolina, a black teacher named Dr. Camille Roberts stood in front of 23 children and taught the lesson on the civil rights movement. She had no idea that within the hour, 2 security guards would enter her classroom, grip her by both arms, and escort her out of the building in front of her students, some of whom would cry, some of whom would film it on phones they weren't supposed to have, and all of whom would remember it for the rest of their lives. What she also didn't know was that buried in the school's email server were 47 messages that would soon be dragged into the light, messages that would expose a conspiracy so deliberate, so calculated, that it would destroy careers, trigger federal investigations, and change education policy across 3 states. Before we dive into this story, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and comment your city name below. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. Thank you. This is the story of one complaint, one teacher, and the hidden paper trail that proved what so many had suspected but could never prove: that power left unchecked does not protect the innocent. It protects itself. Dr. Camille Roberts was 34 years old the morning it happened. She was 5'6", with natural hair she wore in twists, a soft voice she used to command respect rather than demand it, and a teaching style her students described as firm but kind. She had been at Riverside Preparatory for 6 years. She had a spotless record. She had won Teacher of the Year twice. She had letters from parents thanking her for changing their children's lives. She had a wall in her classroom covered in student artwork, thank you notes, and photographs from field trips. And on September 27th, she had 23 10-year-olds sitting in front of her, learning about Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. She didn't know that upstairs, in the administrative suite on the 3rd floor, a decision had already been made. She didn't know that her name had been mentioned in 3 separate meetings that week. She didn't know that a single parent's complaint, filed 6 days earlier, had set in motion a chain of events that would end with her being physically removed from her own classroom. What no one realized yet was that Dr. Doctor Camille Roberts had been documenting everything, every meeting, every email, every conversation, every slight, every policy violation, every quiet act of retaliation that she had endured over the past 18 months. And when the emails finally dropped, when the truth came pouring out in black and white and timestamp and subject line, the people who thought they had all the power would learn a lesson they should have been taught long ago: that silence is not the same as consent, that patience is not the same as weakness, and that a paper trail, once it exists, cannot be erased. Camille Roberts grew up in Durham, North Carolina, in a neighborhood where most families knew each other by name and front porches served as community centers. Her grandmother, Miss Evelyn Roberts, had been a maid for 37 years, cleaning houses for white families across the city. Evelyn never finished high school, but every night after 10-hour shifts, scrubbing floors and folding laundry, she would come home and sit with young Camille at the kitchen table, helping her with homework, reading to her from library books, telling her the same thing over and over until it became the rhythm of Camille's heartbeat. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you. Not poverty, not prejudice, not nothing. You fill your mind and you own yourself. Camille believed her. She graduated valedictorian from her high school. She went to North Carolina A&T State University on a full scholarship. She majored in elementary education and African American studies. She got her master's degree at UNC Chapel Hill. She student taught. in under-resourced schools where textbooks were outdated and heating systems broke down in winter. She saw what happened when children were overlooked. She saw what happened when teachers burned out. She saw the machinery of neglect, and she decided she would spend her life fighting it. By the time she was hired at Riverside Preparatory Academy, she had 7 years of teaching experience, glowing recommendations, and a reputation for turning struggling students into confident learners. Riverside was a charter school with a progressive mission statement, diverse enrollment, and a board of directors that promised equity, inclusion, and excellence for every child. Camille thought she had found a home. For the first 4 years, she had. She built relationships with her students. She collaborated with colleagues. She organized after-school tutoring and started a book club for 5th graders. She was respected. She was valued. She was seen. And then the leadership changed. In the summer of 2021, the school hired a new principal. His name was Dr. Kenneth Whitmore. He was 52 years old, white, with a doctorate in educational leadership from a private university and a resume that included stints at 3 other charter schools. He came in talking about accountability, rigor, and data-driven instruction. He used phrases like high expectations and non-negotiables. He smiled often, he shook hands, he made promises. But within 3 months, the staff began to notice patterns. Whitmore observed black teachers more frequently than white teachers. He critiqued their lesson plans more harshly. He questioned their grading practices, their classroom management, their tone with students. He held them to standards that seemed to shift depending on who was being evaluated. Camille noticed it too, but she didn't say anything at first. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself to keep her head down and do her job. She told herself that if she just worked harder, stayed later, documented everything, the bias would disappear. It didn't. In November of that year, Whitmore observed Camille's classroom unannounced. He sat in the back with a laptop, typing notes while she taught a lesson on fractions. Afterward, he called her into his office and told her that her instruction lacked rigor, that her students were too comfortable. That comfort, he said, was the enemy of growth. Camille asked for specifics. He didn't provide any. He told her he would observe her again in 2 weeks. He did. This time, he said her classroom management was inconsistent, that she let students talk too much, that she needed to be firmer, clearer, more authoritative. Camille went home that night and cried, not because of the criticism. She had been critiqued before. She could handle feedback. But because she knew deep in her gut that this wasn't about her teaching, this was about her. She started keeping a journal. She wrote down every interaction with Whitmore, every observation, every comment, every meeting. She saved every email, she took screenshots, she built a record, and she kept teaching. By the spring of 2022, other black teachers at Riverside began coming to her quietly, in whispers during lunch, in texts after hours. They told her they were experiencing the same thing. One teacher, a black man named Marcus, said Whitmore had written him up for being too casual with students. Another, a black woman named Shauna, said she had been denied a raise because her classroom environment lacked structure. A third, a Latina teacher named Rosa, said Whitmore had questioned whether she was really committed to the school's mission after she took 2 days off for a family emergency. They were all afraid. They were all exhausted. And none of them knew what to do. Camille suggested they document everything. She told them to save emails, write down dates and times, keep records of every evaluation and every conversation. She told them that if they ever needed to prove what was happening, they would need evidence. They agreed. They started building files, but they didn't file complaints, not yet. They wanted to believe it would get better. They wanted to believe that if they just proved themselves, worked harder, stayed professional, the bias would stop. It didn't. In August of 2023, the school year began. Camille was assigned a new classroom on the second floor. She decorated it the way she always did. Posters of historical figures, a reading corner with beanbags and bookshelves, a whiteboard covered in goals and affirmations. She met her new students, learned their names, called their parents, and started building the kind of classroom culture she had always believed in, one where every child felt seen, heard, and valued. 3 weeks into the school year, a parent named Jennifer Carlisle filed a complaint. Jennifer Carlisle was white, 41 years old, and the mother of a 5th grader named Ethan. Ethan was in Camille's class. He was a bright kid, but he struggled with focus. He talked out of turn. He distracted other students. Camille had addressed it the way she always did, with patience, clear expectations, and consistent follow-through. She had also called Jennifer twice to discuss strategies for supporting Ethan at home. Jennifer didn't like that. She didn't like being told her son needed support. She didn't like the suggestion that he might be disrupting other students. And she especially didn't like the fact that a black woman was the one telling her. On September 21st, Jennifer sent an email to Principal Whitmore. The subject line read, "Concerns about Mrs. Roberts." In the email, Jennifer claimed that Camille was targeting her son, that she was overly critical and unfair, that Ethan came home upset multiple times because Mrs. Roberts singled him out in front of the class. She said she was deeply concerned about the classroom environment and requested that Ethan be moved to a different teacher. She did not provide examples. She did not mention the phone calls. She did not acknowledge that Ethan had been disrupting other students. She simply accused. And she sent copies of the email to the assistant principal, the school counselor, and 2 members of the board of directors. Whitmore received the email at 9:43 in the morning. By 10:15, he had forwarded it to the assistant principal, Dr. Taul, Laura Hernandez, with a note that read, "Let's discuss." This is the second complaint about Roberts this year. There had been no first complaint. Whitmore had made that up. By 11:30, Whitmore and Hernandez had met. They decided that Camille would be placed on an improvement plan. They decided they would observe her classroom daily for 2 weeks. They decided they would document every instance of concern. And they decided they would not tell Camille about the complaint until after they had gathered enough evidence to justify whatever action they wanted to take. What they didn't know was that Laura Hernandez, the assistant principal, was uncomfortable with the plan. She thought it was excessive. She thought it was unfair. And she thought it was racial. But she didn't say anything, not then. She told herself she would wait and see. On September 25th, Whitmore observed Camille's class for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. He said nothing to her beforehand. He simply walked in, sat down, and took notes. Camille taught a lesson on the civil rights movement. She used primary sources. She facilitated a discussion. She asked questions that made her students think. The lesson was strong. The students were engaged. Whitmore wrote in his notes that the lesson was politically charged and that Camille's tone was confrontational. On September 26th, Whitmore called Camille into his office. He told her that a parent had expressed concerns. He did not tell her who. He did not tell her what the concerns were. He told her only that he would be monitoring her classroom closely and that she needed to reflect on her practice. Camille asked for specifics. He refused to give them. She asked to see the complaint. He said it was confidential. She asked if she could respond. He said there was nothing to respond to yet. She left his office shaking. That night, she called her union representative. She called the lawyer she sent an email to. Whitmore requesting a formal meeting to discuss the complaint and requesting copies of all documentation related to her performance. She copied the assistant principal, the school counselor, and her union rep. Whitmore did not respond. The next morning, September 27th, Camille arrived at school at 7:15. She unlocked her classroom, turned on the lights, and prepared for the day. Her students arrived at 8:30. She greeted each one by name. She took attendance. She led the morning meeting. She transitioned into social studies. At 9:42, two security guards entered her classroom. They were both men. One was tall and broad-shouldered. The other was shorter, with a radio clipped to his belt. They walked to the front of the room and stood on either side of Camille. The tall one said, "Mrs. Roberts, you need to come with us." Camille looked at them, confused. "Excuse me? You need to come with us? Now. Why? What's going on? We've been instructed to escort you out of the building." The classroom went silent. 23 10-year-olds stared. Some looked scared. Some looked confused. One student, a girl named Zaria, started to cry. Camille felt her heart hammering. She kept her voice calm. "Can you please tell me why?" The shorter guard looked uncomfortable. "We don't have that information, ma'am. We were just told to escort you out." "Who told you?" "Principal Whitmore." Camille felt the room tilting. She looked at her students. She looked at the guards. She looked at the door. She knew if she resisted, it would get worse. She knew if she made a scene, they would use it against her. She knew the cameras were watching. She knew her students were watching. She knew this moment would define her, not because of what was happening to her, but because of how she responded. She took a breath. She turned to her students. She said, "It's okay. I'll be back soon. Keep working on your assignment. Be kind to each other." Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. The guards each took one of her arms, not roughly, but firmly. They walked her out of the classroom, down the hall, past other teachers and students who stopped and stared, down the stairs, through the front lobby, and out the main entrance. They walked her to the parking lot. They told her to leave the premises. They told her she was not allowed to return until further notice. They told her she would receive further instructions from the principal. And then they walked back inside, leaving her standing alone in the parking lot at 9:57 in the morning on a Wednesday, September, with no explanation, no due process, and no idea what had just happened. But what Camille didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this was not the end. This was the beginning, because in the days that followed, someone inside Riverside Preparatory Academy would make a choice to do the right thing, a choice to leak 47 emails. And those emails would blow the whole thing wide open. Camille sat in her car for 20 minutes. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't call anyone. She just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. Her classroom was on the second floor. She could see the window from where she was parked. She imagined her students sitting in there, confused and scared, with no teacher and no explanation. She imagined Zaria still crying. She imagined the other teachers whispering. She imagined Whitmore sitting in his office, checking a box on some invisible list. Finally, she started the car. She drove home. She walked inside her small apartment, set her bag on the kitchen table, and called her grandmother. Miss Evelyn answered on the second ring. "Baby, you okay? You don't usually call this time of day. Camille's voice cracked. Grandma, they kicked me out. Who kicked you out? The school. They sent security guards into my classroom and walked me out in front of my students. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Evelyn said, voice low and steady, did they tell you why? No. Did they give you paperwork? No. Did they let you speak? No. Another silence. Then, baby, listen to me. You didn't do nothing wrong. You hear me? You didn't do nothing wrong. They're doing this because they're scared of you, scared of what you represent, scared of what you know. But here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna get every piece of paper you ever saved, every email, every note, every text. You're gonna build your case, and then you're gonna fight. Camille wiped her eyes. I don't know if I have the strength, Grandma. You do. You got my blood, and my blood don't quit. Camille nodded even though her grandmother couldn't see her. Okay, now go get your papers. I'll be there in an hour. Evelyn hung up. Camille sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She logged into her email. She opened the folder labeled Documentation. Inside were 6 months of saved messages, observation notes, meeting summaries, and written correspondence. She had everything. She had been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. She started reading. And as she read, the pattern became undeniable. Every email from Whitmore was vague, accusatory, and lacking specifics. Every observation was negative. Every request for clarification was ignored. Every attempt to defend herself was dismissed. It was a paper trail, but it was her paper trail. What she didn't have yet was theirs. But that was about to change, because at that exact moment, 11 miles away, inside Riverside Preparatory Academy, Assistant Principal Dr. Laura Hernandez was sitting in her office staring at her computer screen. On the screen was an email chain, a chain that had started 3 weeks earlier, a chain that included Principal Whitmore, the school's attorney, and 2 members of the board of directors. A chain that outlined in explicit detail a plan to performance manage Dr. Camille Roberts out of her position. The phrase they used was, build a case. Laura had been copied on the emails. She had read them. She had said nothing. But now, sitting alone in her office, watching security footage of Camille being escorted out of the building, she felt something shift inside her. She thought about her own mother, who had been a teacher for 30 years. She thought about her own daughter, who wanted to be a teacher. She thought about what kind of person she wanted to be, and she made a decision. She forwarded the entire email chain to her personal account. Then she forwarded it to Camille's union representative. Then she forwarded it to an education reporter at the Charlotte Observer. She didn't sign her name. She didn't write a note. She just hit send 3 times. And then she closed her laptop, picked up her purse, walked out of her office, walked out of the building, got in her car, and drove away. She didn't come back. By the end of the day, the emails had been received. By the end of the week, they had been verified. And by the end of the month, they had been published. 47 emails, 17 people, 1 conspiracy, and the beginning of the end for everyone involved. The union representative's name was Thomas Brennan. He was 61 years old, a former high school English teacher, and a man who had spent 37 years fighting for educators. He had seen retaliation before, he had seen bias before, he had seen teachers pushed out, silenced, discredited, and destroyed. But he had never seen a paper trail quite like this one. The emails arrived in his inbox at 2:37 in the afternoon on September 27th. The subject line read, "You need to see this." There was no message, just an attachment, a PDF containing 47 pages of email correspondence. Thomas opened it. He read the first page, then the second, then the third. By the time he reached page 10, his hands were shaking. By page 20, he was on the phone with the union's legal team. By page 30, he was drafting a formal complaint to the State Board of Education. And by page 47, he knew that this case was going to be bigger than anyone had anticipated. He called Camille at 4:15. Dr. Sivany, Roberts, this is Thomas Brennan from the Teachers Union. We spoke last night. I need you to come to my office as soon as possible. What's going on? I received documents. I can't discuss them over the phone. Can you be here in an hour? Yes. Good. Bring everything you have. Every email, every note, every record. We're going to need it all. Camille arrived at 5:30. She brought a flash drive containing 18 months of documentation. She brought printed copies of observation reports, parent emails, and meeting notes. She brought her calendar, her grade book, and her lesson plans. She brought everything. Thomas met her in a small conference room. He closed the door. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Part anger, part sadness, part determination. He said, Dr. Roberts, I'm going to show you something. And after you read it, we're going to talk about what comes next. But I need you to understand something first. What was done to you was not just wrong. It was planned. It was calculated. And it was documented. He slid the printed emails across the table. Camille picked them up. She started reading. The first email was dated September 4th, 3 weeks before she was removed from her classroom. It was from Principal Whitmore to the school's attorney, a man named Gregory Dalton. The subject line read, Personnel matter, confidential. The email read, Greg, we need to discuss strategy regarding C. Roberts. Parent complaint incoming. Want to move quickly, but need to ensure we're protected legally. Advise on process for building documentation ahead of termination. Timing is critical. Camille's stomach dropped. She kept reading. The second email was the attorney's response. Can recommend standard performance improvement plan. Document observations, cite policy violations, create clear trail, avoid any mention of race or protected complaints, frame as performance-based, will draft language. The third email was from Whitmore to Assistant Principal Laura Hernandez, dated September 8th. Laura, moving forward with improvement plan for Roberts. Need you to observe her classroom daily starting next week. Focus on management, rigor, tone. Document anything that can be used. Let's discuss. The fourth email was from Whitmore to a board member named Patricia Gaines, dated September 14th. Patricia, following up on our conversation. Robert's situation progressing as planned. Complaint received from parent. Observations underway. Should have sufficient documentation within 2 weeks. We'll keep you updated. The fifth email was from Patricia Gaines back to Whitmore. Excellent. Let me know if you need board support. We've been waiting for an opportunity. Proceed carefully. Camille read all 47 emails. She read them twice. And with each page, the picture became clearer. This was not a response to a complaint. This was a plan. They had decided to get rid of her before the complaint even arrived. They had used Jennifer Carlisle's email as a pretext. They had manufactured observations, they had fabricated a narrative, and they had coordinated every step with legal counsel and the board of directors. They had conspired to destroy her career. When she finished reading, she looked up at Thomas. Her hands were trembling, her jaw was tight, but her voice was steady. They planned this. Yes. They were going to fire me no matter what I did. Yes. And they documented the whole thing. Yes. Which means we have them. Camille set the papers down. She took a breath. She said, "What do we do?" Thomas leaned forward. "We fight. We file a formal complaint with the State Board of Education. We file a discrimination claim with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We notify the Department of Justice. We contact the media, and we make sure every person who was part of this plan is held accountable. Will it work? I don't know. But I know this. They made a mistake. They thought they were being careful. They thought email was private. They thought nobody would ever see these messages, but somebody did. Somebody inside that building saw what they were doing and decided to blow the whistle. And that changes everything." Camille nodded. "Okay, let's do it." Thomas smiled. "Good, because you're not alone in this. There are other teachers, other people who've been watching, other people who are ready to speak up. This isn't just about you anymore. This is about all of them." He was right. Within 48 hours, 3 other teachers came forward: Marcus, Shauna, and Rosa. They each brought their own documentation, their own emails, their own stories of retaliation, bias, and targeted harassment. They each filed formal complaints, and they each agreed to speak publicly. By the end of the first week, the story had gone local. A reporter from the Charlotte Observer named Jessica Huang published a front-page article titled "Charter School Emails Reveal Plan to Oust Black Teacher." Ontes, the article included excerpts from the leaked emails, quotes from Camille and the other teachers, and a statement from the school's attorney denying any wrongdoing. The statement read, "Riverside Preparatory Academy categorically denies any allegation of discrimination or retaliation. Dr. Roberts was placed on administrative leave due to legitimate performance concerns. Any suggestion of bias or conspiracy is unfounded and irresponsible." The statement was released at 10 in the morning. By 3 that afternoon, it had been shredded on social media. Parents, former students, community members, and educators across the state began sharing the article. Hashtags like Justice for Roberts and Riverside Accountability began trending. The school's phone lines were flooded. The board of directors' email inboxes filled with hundreds of messages demanding accountability. And then, on day 9, someone else came forward, a former Riverside teacher named Monica Grant, who had left the school the previous year after being placed on an improvement plan by Principal Whitmore. She said she had been too afraid to speak up before, but now, seeing Camille's story, she decided it was time. She brought her own documentation, her own emails, her own proof of the same pattern. She was Black. She had been Teacher of the Year, and she had been pushed out the exact same way. By the end of week 2, 6 teachers had come forward, all of them Black or brown, all of them high-performing, all of them targeted by the same principal, using the same tactics. The pattern was undeniable, and the emails proved it. On October 12th, 15 days after Camille was removed from her classroom, the North Carolina State Board of Education opened a formal investigation into Riverside Preparatory Academy. The investigation would examine hiring practices, disciplinary procedures, and allegations of racial discrimination. It would review emails, personnel files, and interview current and former staff members. On October 14th, the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division sent a letter to Riverside's Board of Directors notifying them that the school was under federal investigation for potential violations of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. On October 17th, Principal Kenneth Whitmore was placed on administrative leave. On October 19th, Assistant Principal Laura Hernandez resigned. In her resignation letter, which was later leaked to the press, she wrote, "I can no longer be complicit in a system that punishes integrity and rewards discrimination. I should have spoken up sooner. I deeply regret my silence, and I am prepared to cooperate fully with all investigations. Her resignation letter confirmed what many had suspected: she was the whistleblower. On October 23rd, the school's attorney, Gregory Dalton, withdrew his representation. On October 26th, board member Patricia Gaines resigned. And on October 30th, 1 month and 3 days after Camille Roberts was escorted out of her classroom by 2 security guards, the Riverside Preparatory Academy Board of Directors held an emergency meeting. They voted unanimously to terminate Principal Kenneth Whitmore for cause. They issued a public apology to Dr. Roberts and the other affected teachers. They committed to an independent review of all personnel practices. And they invited Dr. Roberts to return to her classroom. Camille considered it. She talked to her grandmother. She talked to her union rep. She talked to her lawyer. And then she declined, because she knew that returning to Riverside would mean working in a place that had tried to destroy her, and she was worth more than that. Instead, she filed a federal lawsuit, not just for herself, but for every teacher who had been silenced, every teacher who had been pushed out, every teacher who had been afraid to speak up. She sued for discrimination, retaliation, emotional distress, and violation of civil rights. She sued the school, the board, Whitmore, and the attorney. She demanded accountability, she demanded transparency, and she demanded change. The case took 18 months. During that time, Camille did not teach. She could not teach. She had been traumatized. She had been humiliated. She had lost sleep, lost weight, lost her sense of safety. But she did not lose her voice. She spoke at community forums. She testified before the state legislature. She wrote op-eds. She appeared on local news programs. She told her story over and over again, not because she wanted attention, but because she knew that silence protects abusers. And the more she spoke, the more people listened. In March of 2025, the case went to trial. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury heard testimony from Camille, from the other affected teachers, from parents, from students, and from experts in employment discrimination. They reviewed the 47 emails, they reviewed the performance evaluations, they reviewed the timeline, and after 6 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. The jury awarded Camille $2.4 million in damages. They awarded the other teachers a combined $3.7 million, and they sent a message that reverberated across the state and beyond, that documentation matters, that whistleblowers matter, and that teachers who stand up for themselves and their students deserve protection, not punishment. But the money was never the point. The point was the change that followed. Because of the case, North Carolina passed new legislation requiring charter schools to implement third-party oversight of personnel decisions. Because of the case, the State Board of Education mandated implicit bias training for all school administrators. Because of the case, a whistleblower protection hotline was established for educators. And because of the case, hundreds of teachers across the state began documenting their own experiences, building their own cases, and refusing to stay silent. Camille never returned to Riverside Preparatory Academy, but she did return to teaching. 2 years after the trial, she accepted a position at a public school in Durham, the city where she grew up. She teaches 5th grade. She decorates her classroom with posters and books and student artwork. She builds relationships with her students. She calls their parents. She teaches them history and math and science. And she teaches them something else too. She teaches them that their voices matter, that their stories matter, that they should never let anyone make them feel invisible. Her grandmother, Miss Evelyn, is 87 years old now. She still lives in Durham. She still sits at the kitchen table and helps her great-grandchildren with their homework. And when they ask her about Camille, she tells them the same thing she told Camille all those years ago. Education is the one thing nobody can take from you. Not poverty, not prejudice, not nothing. You fill your mind and you own yourself. Camille still keeps records. She still saves emails. She still documents everything. Not because she expects to need it, but because she knows that power, left unchecked, will always try to protect itself. And the only way to fight it is with truth. The 47 emails that exposed the conspiracy at Riverside Preparatory Academy are now part of the public record. They are cited in legal briefs, academic studies, and training materials for school administrators. They are taught in education policy courses. They are referenced in legislative hearings. They have become a symbol of what happens when people in power forget that their words leave trails, and that trails can be followed. Kenneth Whitmore never worked in education again. He lost his teaching license. He lost his reputation. He moved out of state. He is remembered not for anything he built, but for what he tried to destroy. Laura Hernandez, the assistant principal who leaked the emails, went on to work as an advocate for teachers' rights. She speaks publicly about her regret, her complicity, and the moment she decided to do the right thing. She says she wishes she had acted sooner. But she also says that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. Jennifer Carlisle, the parent whose complaint was used as the pretext for Camille's removal, never spoke publicly about the case. But her son Ethan, now a teenager, wrote a letter to Camille 3 years after the incident. In it, he apologized. He said he didn't understand what had happened at the time, but he understands now. And he thanked her for being the kind of teacher who made him think. Camille keeps that letter in a folder on her desk. Next to it is a photograph of her grandmother. And next to that is a framed copy of the verdict, not because she is proud of winning, but because she wants to remember what it cost and what it was worth. This story is a fictional dramatization inspired by real events of injustice, courage, and the power of documentation. It reflects the experiences of countless educators who have faced discrimination, retaliation, and systemic bias. It honors the whistleblowers who risk everything to do what is right. And it reminds us that silence, while safe, is never the answer. There are teachers in your community right now who are facing the same battles Camille faced. There are administrators who believe they are above accountability. There are systems that protect power instead of people. And there are emails, records, and paper trails that could change everything if someone is brave enough to bring them to light. If you are an educator, document everything. Save your emails, keep your records, build your case. You are not paranoid. You are prepared. If you are a parent, listen to teachers, believe them, support them. They are not the enemy. They are the ones fighting for your children. If you are a leader, remember that your words leave trails. Your decisions have consequences, and your power is not a shield. It is a responsibility. And if you are someone who has seen wrongdoing and stayed silent, know that it is never too late to speak up. Courage is not a feeling, it is a choice. Choose it. This has been the story of Dr. Camille Roberts, a teacher who was dragged out of her classroom by security guards, a woman who refused to stay silent, and a whistleblower who proved that when the emails drop, power doesn't just shift, it falls. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to this channel, share this story, and comment your city name below. Let's build a community that refuses to let injustice hide in the shadows.